everyone, this is Eve Picker, and if you listen to this podcast series, you're going to learn how to make some change. Hi there, thanks so much for joining me today for the latest episode of Impact Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Christine Mondor, a neighbor of mine in Pittsburgh and an architect with her own company, evolveEA. And Evolve is leading the charge in sustainability in the architectural world in Pittsburgh. Christine believes in the power of design in shaping a sustainable environment. I'm fascinated at how much Christine focuses on designing or redesigning the infrastructure of cities. This is something that not even I, a fallen architect, expect. In this podcast, we talk about the rapidly shifting roles and responsibilities of architects for our rapidly changing environment. Be sure to go to evepicker.com to find out more about Christine on the show notes page for this episode. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter so that you can access information about impact real estate investing and get the latest news about the exciting projects on my crowdfunding platform, Small Change. Hi, Christine. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Eve?
Good. So I know you pretty well. I've known you for quite a few years now, but our audience probably doesn't. You want to tell them a little bit about what you do?
So my name is Christine Mondor, and I am an architect. I have the pleasure of having that be both my vocation and my profession. And so I really love the field of architecture, buildings and spaces and communities and environments. And I also have a practice called Evolve Environment Architecture, where I get to have that as my profession and do that for a living. And so my firm, Evolve Environment Architecture, was started in 2004. I had a history of practicing in kind of post-industrial cities or the city of Pittsburgh during some of its hardest times, and really always thought that there was an upswing coming, and specifically when that upswing is framed around sustainability and triple bottom line, equity and environment and economics. And so I started my firm with my partner, Mark, and we really framed it around sustainability. And I think when we started the firm, a lot of the work that we were doing, people thought might be temporary, might be a nice thing to do for a couple of years in terms of sustainability. But what we found is that while we were out in front in the early years with regards to sustainability in our practice, the rest of the society kind of caught up, and what was once an outlier became standard practice. And now, in the folks that we hire, the people that we work for, they're always asking for, what's next, what's more, what else can we be doing? So it's been a really great process since 2004 of, kind of defining a field of practice, spreading the word about this field of practice, and having people join us in as clients and as communities and as our colleagues. And now it's to the point where, there's just so many challenges to try and hit on that we definitely are glad that many others are walking here beside us.
So I love in your bio the first statement that you're an eternal optimist regarding the power of design in shaping a sustainable environment. I'd love to know more about that.
I used to have this phenomena where in Pittsburgh and you know these places well as you would walk around the communities, and you might have a visitor with you from somewhere else, and you would be just enamored and in love with everything that you see. And somebody would say to you, "Why are you taking me around to this neighborhood? I don't see anything here." And you have this kind of gut check where you realize that you're looking and you're seeing a future condition, a condition where things are more environmentally sustainable, where the community is lifted up and so that all may prosper. And frankly, it just has really great design as well. And that, when you have these other people around, they're not seeing that. And so it's your obligation to make that happen. And so when I realized that I had that kind of disjuncture in what I was seeing and maybe what others were seeing, that was my eternal optimism. People would say, well, you're optimistic, aren't you?
I think it's a great way to describe it. My husband always says that, when I drag him into an old building and all he sees is pigeon shit and decrepitude, and I'm standing there saying, this is beautiful. He's just perpetually stunned. So
that's exactly it. Yep.
So that's the lot of a designer, right? Just trying to find a way to show the rest of the world what's possible. So what are you working on at the moment?
We are doing a lot of, so in our firm, we work at 3 different scales. We work at the macro, meso, and micro scale. The micro scale, as we think about, is kind of like buildings and spaces, and we're working a lot with universities and commercial clients to, make outstanding places, inspiring places, but that are also high performing and really are thinking about future conditions. But we're also working a lot with district scale work, that meso scale, communities and neighborhoods, and also the regional scale, and that's kind of infrastructure. And that's the part that I spend most of my time in, and really thinking about these things as systems. And so we're doing work with a lot of stormwater work. And that is, taking an infrastructure system that previously was below grade and pipes, and thinking about it as a land use question and how it can really add to a community. But I find it especially fascinating because you have to think about it in terms of future proofing. And so it's not just a question of doing, say, green infrastructure to capture stormwater and prevent it from getting into the storm pipes and putting sewage out into our rivers and waterways. But it's really a question of how are we going to recreate how our communities work so that we can deal with this issue in environmentally and equitable way, environmentally beneficial and equitable, but also so that we can begin to deal with the issues of climate change in this very dramatic way that we're seeing it play out. Yesterday here in the city, we had a morning rain that sent many communities into full flood mode and even closed off a regional hospital for a period of time. That is a fascinating question of infrastructure planning that if we are really going to deal with those issues, our communities are going to be reshaped. And it's not just a little bioswale in somebody's front yard. We're talking about rethinking the systems that we designed 100 to 150 years ago. And I find that work really fascinating. So we're doing that work around stormwater and transit.
Be sure to go to evepicker.com and sign up for my free educational newsletter about impact real estate investing. You'll be among the first to hear about new projects you can invest in. That's evepicker.com. Thanks so much. So, at the moment I feel like I'm living in Kevin Costner's Waterworld. It's a little crazy. Maybe we can all learn something from that. Anyway, but when you talk about this, I realize that most people think about architects probably in a completely different way, that they're busy designing single family homes and office buildings. But you're talking about sort of redesigning the infrastructure for cities and neighborhoods. I don't think people realize that's what architects do.
Yeah. I don't think so either. I don't think sometimes architects understand that that's what they can do. And, maybe it's because we haven't had the need to do that for the past 50, 100 years. We've been kind of living off the legacy of that original infrastructure and land use work. But both things like climate change and also economic conditions are changing in a way that, forces us to rethink the development patterns that we have, whether it's the availability of mortgages for single-family houses, the failure of shopping malls, and the kind of rethinking distribution patterns for retail. All those things cause pretty significant changes in our cities and our rural regions too. And so architects, we're really well suited to think about that on a qualitative way and a quantitative way. That's our superhero power.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I always think of architecture as a really interesting profession that teaches you how to make something out of nothing. The process of designing something from absolutely nothing in a very creative way. And I think that's pretty rare skill. But I wonder, do you think the profession on the whole is thinking the way you're thinking?
I don't think so. I think that some are, one of the things I always enjoy about your trajectory is that you're able to weave these disparate things together, whether it's a development pattern, a housing type of specific project, or a funding mechanism. You're always pulling these things together to say, okay, what is it that we want to do as a community? And then how do we make these tools work for us? And I think that our architectural training is at the base of that, being able to see across these different disciplines and expertises. And I think that there's a unique need for that now, so that the folks in the profession are waking up to that in fact our most useful role might be outside of what we consider traditional practice. And I think I recently became an AIA fellow, and in the process of that, you kind of have to redefine how your practice has added to the profession. And it helped me realize how we define ourselves as professionals is only scratching the surface of what the potential contribution we can make. And I know we were talking about the role of women. We've talked about that in the past, and how it's hard to find women in the profession or in these elevated or recognized positions. And I think that's because they are oftentimes in non-traditional roles. So the more we expand the definition of the profession, the more we're going to find that those women are out there and they're in influential positions, but they're just not in traditional positions of power. So,
yeah, do you think that, you're still teaching at Carnegie Mellon, right?
Right.
Do you think that, I taught there quite a few years ago now, and I was frustrated with for different reasons. I was frustrated with the very traditional approach to teaching these unbelievably talented kids architecture, because there are so few jobs in that profession as well. Do you think that schools are starting to see that they need to shift what the role of an architect might be in this really, in this world where sustainability has become so important?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that shift is happening, and it has to happen at two levels. First, the profession has to be ready to catch it and to say, is the goal of our professional education to graduate a narrow definition of what it means to be an architect? Or can we broaden that out and embrace a kind of full spectrum where everybody shines a different light on a topic, and in that we see all the colors kind of arise? I think the traditional way of approaching architectural education was that everybody shines the same color light on the subject. And so we are trying to make that light as uniform as possible. And that's, the kind of standards for that education. But when I look at what my students are doing out of graduation at CMU, they're doing things that I don't even know what to call the job. I don't know what it is yet, and they don't know what it is yet. But I don't want them to be outside of our profession. I want to say that is also architecture, yes, but it's a different piece of architecture.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there's an opportunity there that we're kind of missing at school. But I actually want to go back because, I know you did this little Ecodistrict Pivot Plan for Millvale, which is a Rust Belt town outside Pittsburgh. And it's kind of an unusual plan to do for a place like Millvale. And I wanted to give our listeners an idea of what you did for Millvale, so they have a more concrete idea of, what is possible.
So some of the work that we do in systems, sometimes we're working directly with, say, a sewer authority here in Pittsburgh. We've done big planning with Buffalo Sewer Authority. Sometimes we're working with transit authorities. Those are people who hold infrastructure, of systems, and plan that system. But communities are different, where they have many different types of infrastructure woven into the kind of fabric, the social and cultural fabric of what people think of as their community, their home, and their neighborhood. So Ecodistricts, so in the way that we've co-developed it actually with our colleagues in Millvale and with our colleagues in Larimer, another community here in Pittsburgh, is really looking at those larger systems and understanding how these smaller neighborhoods, communities, boroughs interface and weave themselves into it. For instance, in Millvale, in the Pivot Plan, looked at three different areas. It looked at food, water, and energy, and said, okay, how do we make our community better, more equitable, more healthy by looking at these systems and the resources and flows that move through those systems? And that resulted in a plan in 2014 with a number of different things to do for the community. They did them in about 2 years.
That's
and
very
said,
fast.
okay, we're ready. Yeah.
That's really fast.
And I have to say that, no plan really works unless a community is ready to activate around them. But really, we had great community partners and worked hard through the process to build their supportive groups around them so that the community had capacity to do this work. It doesn't work to make a great plan unless they have the capacity to actually execute it, and they did.
So what did they do in those first 2 years?
Yeah, so the first few years were, I'll give you for instance, in energy. We looked across the entire municipality to say, where is energy being used in the community? Where is it being lost? Where is it being gained? And that's anything from, looking at building performance to possibilities for renewable energy to how those things kind of weave into the daily life of communities. And one of the proposals was saying, you've got a couple places here in town that you could do an energy hub where you're harvesting solar energy. It's feeding into a particular function that services the community or a business, and you can kind of punch above your weight because you're thinking outside of a single property and you're looking at more district scale work. So these energy hubs became resiliency hubs, and the community was able to get funding to put a solar resiliency hub in their municipal building because, tragically, they have frequent flooding. And in the case of that, this municipal building serves as, perhaps in some cases, offline, off the grid hub, but it's prepared to be the place where people can go for flooding. But they also did that in places called the Food Hub. The Food Hub is a place where there are a couple businesses being incubated around food-oriented businesses, whether it's a caterer or a startup, but also an organization called 412 Food Rescue, whose home is in the Moose, an old moose lodge that became a food hub. And that is where 412 Food Rescue gathers waste food from other businesses and places where somebody's ordered too much food, and they can capture that and reuse it, repurpose it, put it back out there, and really close loops within the community and within the region. And so this attracting a business like that, having a facility that's sustainably designed and high performance and really creating a culture around these big ideas comes from, this type of eco-district planning that says we're bigger than a project. We're really looking at resource flows, and we want to make some great design moves and really improve the quality of our places in the process.
So they did all of that, and what was next?
So food, water, and energy were first, and with that success, they felt air quality and mobility were two things that were important, as well as the concept of equity. And equity was an underlying theme through everything, but bringing it to the forefront, elevating it to its own category, forced everybody to really look hard at what these goals meant and how they were quantitatively and qualitatively serving the community. I think probably the one that got the most depth to date so far is air quality. because they were able to get additional funding to understand the nature of the exposure of the community to poor air quality, both regionally and localized sources. We did citizen science and monitoring around the community and to understand where the bigger issues were, and then to both try to fix some of the problems and decrease exposure to the community, but also to try and raise awareness. Because what we found, in fact, through this citizen science is that although there are minor variations, for instance, the homes that are near to the woods, but right above the fast food place that fries burgers and sends its exhaust out, they had the worst air quality. We would have thought the houses near the highway had the worst. But
interesting. That's a sad statement.
I know, but we didn't check weight to know if like smelling burgers frying also encouraged you to eat. So I'm not sure about that, but that was an interesting finding that is locally variable for those reasons. But what we found is that all of the stations in fact tracked to the regional, and so we're exposed to things that are coming from Ohio, things that are coming from coal-fired power plants, and then the intermittent releases that happen from our local air emitters. So, that is an advocacy issue. There's nothing that somebody in that community can do to stop that directly if they want to live outside and, walk around. But it is something that if they know it, they can try to change it through policy and through advocacy.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to just change course a little bit and ask you if there are any current trends in real estate development that interest you the most at the moment. Okay.
So this is a great conversation to have with you because I know you're always to the rail on these things. So the two things that I'm really intrigued by, they could be related, but I'm not going to try to relate them here. First of all, I'm interested in the concept of naturally occurring affordable housing because this seems to be the nexus of the strain that we feel when we talk about gentrification or changing markets and displacement. And at least in our region, this concept of naturally occurring affordable housing, it was a fairly common phenomenon that we didn't recognize.
Yeah, can you explain that to the listeners? I don't know if everyone knows what that is. Yeah. What is naturally occurring affordable housing? What does that mean?
So in a weak market, a weak real estate market, like say Pittsburgh was, say the 90s, especially more uniformly weak, naturally occurring affordable housing meant that you never really had to look hard to find affordable housing. But it also means that the housing is underinvested in a way that it doesn't sustain the basic maintenance requirements of the house. And so when I cut my teeth in the profession, what affordable housing meant in Pittsburgh was putting people who were above the average median income into communities that had very low median income because there weren't enough people there was no income diversity and there weren't people who could necessarily care for the infrastructure that existed because there wasn't enough economic resource in that community. Mm-hmm. As a market pivots from weak to strong, the more commonly held narrative that we have now is, trying to prevent displacement because that naturally occurring affordable housing disappears and then folks who had been living there don't have as many options. And so, I think we need to have a broader conversation about the pros of naturally occurring affordable housing, recognizing places that have it, but also recognizing that it comes with its own set of problems that need to be addressed for that housing to be equitable, like to maintain a quality that is equitable. In some communities, code enforcement is targeted at naturally occurring affordable housing because rightfully so, those conditions are not ideal to raise a child in or to live in. But the investment that's required to fix that place then prices somebody out of that unit or it just doesn't get done.
Okay.
So we need to understand what the extent of it is. We need to understand what our tolerance of it is and, how we make sure that people are living in healthy and affordable places.
So this is an interesting concept because there probably is a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing left in Pittsburgh, but sort of the anger from people who are currently being displaced is really around the fact that it's no longer in their own neighborhood, right? Those neighborhoods have been improved now.
Right. It's like, what is the balance that we have between the market doing improvements, between subsidizing improvements to make sure that people have choices and aren't forced to leave? It's oftentimes, terms like gentrification are used to kind of flatten an argument. And when you flatten an argument, you can't get to the nuance that allows you to make sure you're kind of turning the right dial to solve the problem.
I totally agree with you. And I think there are lots of dials to turn. I think, just the idea that as a neighborhood gains value, your property taxes go up with it is a peculiar idea to me. I just really think that people who live in that neighborhood should enjoy the increased value around them, but not be forced to leave because of that adjustment. So I think there are lots of pieces to it for sure.
And that gets to the second thing that is of interest to me in terms of that kind of real estate thing is like, that gets to the idea of ownership, because one of the reasons why people experience it unequally is access to investment, access to properties that don't have tangled titles, access to financial mechanisms to purchase and ownership. And that means that some folks who do have access to that are better prepared to take advantage of a shifting market, whereas others are not. And, I know that home ownership isn't for everybody. What are other models we have where people can have a stake in their neighborhood and be landed, if you will, and have that idea of stability, but not be burdened by responsibilities that they either don't have the resources, whether that be time or money or interest, to take care of? And that is a cooperative model is something that I'm, very intrigued by, and I don't see widespread adoption of, and I don't know why that is, but I'm very, very curious about that as well.
So have you seen anyone use that model in an interesting way?
I think that there are examples of it outside of our region and here in Pittsburgh. And I've spoken with some experts who say there are some here in the region. I don't have enough firsthand experience to know what the reality of the success of those things are yet, but it's definitely something that I'm going to be looking into more so.
Interesting. Okay. So we agree that socially responsible real estate is important. What do you think we need to think about generally to build better places for everyone?
I'm a big fan of the Jane Jacobs quote that, I'm going to paraphrase it here, cities are best whenever they're kind of, say they serve everyone best when they're built by everyone. And I think that thinking about cities as an equitable real estate opportunity is a powerful tool, because we know that capital thinks of cities as a means of making money, but it shouldn't be that you're on one side or the other. It should be that we're thinking about how this mechanism we have can serve a broader purpose and a broader market. And so whether that's kind of helping folks who wouldn't otherwise understand our built environment as a wonderful place to be, but also a place to develop stability and security because of the investment mechanisms that they might have available to them, or whether it's, thinking about their piece within a broader opportunity. And I think, that your small change tool is really a part of that story that's being written, where people can participate in this in different ways, because there's just not enough flexibility in how people participate in making of cities to make sure they don't just have an opinion on how something looks, but also how something works, and that they have a stake in it in the long term.
Yeah, I think you and I have seen how important that is in Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. So what community engagement tools have you seen that you think really work well? That's always the one of the very difficult things, I think, personally.
Yeah, I agree. In order for engagement to be transformational, it needs to be long-term and it needs to be repeated in the eco-district model that we did in Millvale and in other communities with other communities really depends. I think it sets up a model of, first of all, giving people information because they need information and they need to be given decision points that are meaningful and not just decision points that check a box for participation. Secondly, they need to have tools that are suited for their participation, meaning not just how you're asking a question at a meeting or how you're engaging them in a volunteer activity or outside activity, but also this idea of how they become invested in their community financially through time, through effort. It can't just be a meeting and then everybody goes home to their house. It has to be an ongoing effort to build that community. Mm-hmm. And I think that happens with a process that says, we're going to take some time. We're going to figure out who's in the room. We're going to figure out who needs to be in the room. And we're going to have this vision. And then we're going to take these multiple steps and let many voices determine, how it is we're going to get there.
Yeah. Okay. So I think my final question is, so where do you think the future of real estate impact investing lies?
I'm not sure how qualified I am to say that on the broadest scale.
I was actually going to say, you probably just answered that because, what I'm hearing from you is that you really believe that communities should be invested in themselves and in their own future. And that's impact, right?
I worry about the aggregation of capital in large scale investment and whether that's not something that we see here in Pittsburgh as much, but in other cities where investors have come in and bought up, large amounts of single family homes. And what you get is an aggregation of capital and power, and you kind of prevent people from participating in their community in a way that is meaningful. Not to say that everybody wants to be that single family homeowner, but in many communities, it's becoming less and less possible. I think here in Pittsburgh, our challenge might be otherwise in that we need to figure out how to, as our market is shifting, we need to figure out how we allow people to invest in projects and in places that are beyond their scale of engagement. A single investor can't do it. Is it a community investor? Is it co-housing? Is it a cooperative? Is it an investment tool like Small Change? To write a different narrative than just a large-scale global capital that is making so much change in cities across.
Yeah, no, I do agree. But I think what you're grappling with is what I learned early on as a developer, and that is control of property is absolute power. The question is can you somehow shift control of property to a larger group of people? Not...
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a really difficult question. Control of property is powerful for a whole bunch of reasons, financial reasons and other reasons. So it's a really big question. Okay, well, I have 3 sign-off questions that I ask everyone.
Okay.
And so I'm going to ask you too. What is the key factor that makes a project impactful for you?
I think that out of an impactful project, there's a high quality of design and an improvement of the physical place. But there's also a sense of empowerment that comes out of it for all who have participated, whether they just, helped shape it with their opinion or whether they invested or whether they performed some of the work. And that empowerment is what builds communities. And that's what I think is the most impactful.
Okay. And then by raising money, what we do at Small Change. So that we can involve investors so that they can invest and make money just like everyone else. But is there any other benefit of crowdfunding that you see that might benefit communities or impact real estate developers at large? Honestly, one of them, I'm going to answer for you on one of them. I know that you head up the planning commission here locally, and I always think about, if someone came to the planning commission with a project that had a local crowd of investors invested in it, what would the planning commission think about that?
It's an interesting thing because tools we have to influence development are sometimes regulatory, and they're sometimes financial, and they're sometimes kind of cultural or social norms, right? And I think that the Planning Commission has some regulatory tools it has, but it also, reflects some of those criteria reflect broader social norms and some of these other influences. And so, I would love to see projects that come in with creative design that are led by teams that have empowered communities and have a strong financial working model. Having a great triple bottom line is just a great way. Go into it with that. And if you fall short of some things, that's okay, but have some big goals. Yeah. And then it really makes for an amazing process and project. And so I would, love for every project that, that we see in our cities to have that type of effort. And I think we're still blessed here in Pittsburgh because we have a number of locally owned properties. We're not as subject to global capital as other cities are, right? At least at this time. And so we still have some of that ethos, where we're doing it for the common good.
Yes, yeah. And then the final question, which is a really hard one. What is the one thing that you think would improve real estate development in the US that you would change?
I think that much of it is opaque to people who don't have time to really sort through the complexities of it. So I'm not sure that this is the entire system change that's needed, but some part of it needs to change to allow transparency, whether that's understanding how big deals happen and what effect it has on a city and a community, or whether that's understanding how one can participate in it for, their own benefit, but also for a common benefit. I think if those things were more clear and transparent, we'd probably have more equitable participation.
That's a great answer. And I'm going to thank you very much for joining us. I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to go check out the Millvale Eco Plan right now. It sounds really great. I haven't paid enough attention to it. But thank you very much, Christine. It was really nice chatting with you.
Great chatting with you too, Eve.
That was Christine Mondor, founder of evolveEA. Here are some of my takeaways from our chat today. I learned that architects, and Christine in particular, are going far beyond just designing buildings. They are designing infrastructure and pivot plans for entire towns and neighborhoods. I heard the passion behind Christine's conviction that high-quality design can reshape the future for cities. And I heard about her conviction that the housing models of the future need to be cooperative, providing access to ownership for everyone. You can find out more about impact real estate investing and access the show notes for today's episode at my website, evepicker.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to find out more about how to make money in real estate while building better cities. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. And thank you, Christine, for sharing your thoughts. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.